Now the landing craft coming in, some of them hit those mounds of sand and thought they'd reached the beach, so they dropped the ramp, and the lads just jumped off into about 10, 15 foot of water with all the gear on, and they stood no chance. The next little wave lifted the landing craft and it went over the chaps that had gone down before. And that was a terrible sight to see, was that.
At 7:37 on the 6th of June 1944, the ramps of the assault landing craft swung open and the men of A and D Company 6th Battalion Green Howards came storming up the beaches. They were met with hell. The beaches were filled with booby traps and swept by machine gun fire. Mortars exploded all around them. Many didn't even make it out of the water. It was the first action of what would be, for some, the longest day, and for many others, their final one.
To tell the definitive history of D-Day would be near impossible. The scale of the invasion too gigantic. The individual stories of bravery, of heroism, of tragedy too numerous. And so I want to put D-Day under the microscope and focus in on one unit, the men of the Green Howards, who landed here. We're going to trace their footsteps from midnight on June 6th to midnight on June 7th, 1944.
I'm James Rogers, and I'm turning D-Day detective using diaries, maps, photographs and interviews from veterans to piece together their D-Day. From the landing beaches to enemy gun batteries, tiny villages to the famous French bocage, I'm going to delve into every second of that day, from the moment their boots hit the sand to where they finally dug in for the night.
The Green Howards were just a tiny cog in the massive machine that was Operation Neptune, otherwise known as the D-Day landings. But each individual unit had an important role to play. And so by starting to understand their journey, we can really see how D-Day, the 6th of June 1944, began to unfold. On June 5th, 1944, the men of the 6th and 7th Green Howards were on their ships in the English Channel. At around 5 o'clock, they heard an announcement over their tannoy from the senior transport officer. I have that announcement here in the battalion diaries. It says quite clearly that at 17:45 hours, this ship will weigh anchor and in passage with the remainder of the Armada, sail for the coast of France. A great silence, it said, fell over the ship, as all realised that at last the invasion was on, and that tomorrow would be D-Day. At midnight on the 6th of June 1944, the men of the 6th and the 7th Green Howards were on their ships crossing the Channel. In just a few short hours, they'd be storming the beaches of Normandy.
In putting the Green Howards at the spearhead of the invasion, the British were putting one of the most famous old units first. Traditionally a proud Yorkshire regiment, they were originally raised in 1688 during the Glorious Revolution. They fought across the world, from Spain to the USA, India to the Crimea. They got their distinctive name in 1744, named after their colonel at the time, Sir Charles Howard, and the colour of their uniform facing. During the Second World War, the Green Howards had battalions stationed all over the world, but it would be the men of the 6th and 7th Green Howards who would be landing in Normandy on D-Day, And by that time, some of those men had already seen their fair share of fighting. They had defended and retreated from France in 1940 before fighting through North Africa and Italy. But now the battle-hardened group, replenished with new eager soldiers, would be at the vanguard of the liberation of Europe. Planning for Operation Overlord had been happening for several years before the invasion took place.
This documentary is brought to you by World of Warships. World of Warships is an online multiplayer naval warfare game where you'll assist your team in winning grand naval engagements based on pivotal sea battles in history, and it's totally free to play. To commemorate the 80th anniversary of D-Day, you'll be able to take command of the naval fleets that played such a vital role in the Allied assault on Normandy, with brand new missions inspired by the real-life events of the D-Day landings. Plus, if you register through the link in the description, you'll also get a free starter pack worth €25, so you can participate in this special event and try new ships. Follow the link below and try World of Warships today. Now, on with the video.
It was decided that Normandy would be the location for the landings, and the 50-mile stretch of coastline would be divided up into 5 codenamed sectors: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. The beach that I'm interested in is right here, Gold, and specifically this sector of Gold Beach, given the code name King. And then, if you want to be even more specific, the western half of King Gold, which was called King Green, because it was here that the men of the Green Howards were going to come ashore, part of the force to liberate Europe. But in addition to the D-Day detective kit I've gathered, I've called in the big guns. Battlefield historian Eric Turnbull. He knows Normandy like the back of his hand, and he will be crucial in helping me to follow in the footsteps of the Green Howards.
Now, we know the Normandy landings are all about the overarching aim of liberating Europe, ousting the Nazis. But what was the objectives of D-Day itself?
D-Day is a logistical land grab for the Allies. We're grabbing as much land in one day as we can possibly do, building up our defences by the end of the day to prepare for German counterattacks. And we're going to link up the areas because there's anything from about 1.5 miles to about 16 miles between the beaches as quickly as humanly possible.
Right, I see. So get as far inland as possible to try and absorb as much of the German defences, the German attack, and then dig in and prepare for that counter.
Yeah, and then push forward on the 7th as possible. Yeah.
That's incredible. Yeah. And so where were the Green Howards?
The Green Howards are coming in at Vers-sur-Mer, just past here, just past the port of Courseulles.
And that's where we are now?
That is it.
So they would have been coming in here?
Well, just over there, about 500-600 yards away. Yeah.
So what was the objective of the Green Howards on D-Day?
The Green Howards are going to land with the 6th Battalion up.
Okay.
Yeah, followed by the 7th, passing through. We're going to take the coastal defence.
Okay.
We're going to take the coastal gun batteries.
Yep.
As we pass through, we're going to bypass other positions. They're then going to push inland as far as the Baia-Con road, cutting the main Paris-Cherbourg road,
right,
reaching the Saint-Léger feature. And they'll be spread out as a brigade with the 7th Green Howards on the kind of eastern side, 5th East Yorkshires, and then the 6th Green Howards just slightly to the west. Broad front, yeah?
Yeah.
Supported by their tank units, artillery units, anti-tank gunners.
Yeah.
It's a big landing.
It's a big landing.
156,000 people.
And how far were the Green Howards expected to go in a day?
Well, you're looking about 7-8 miles. It's a long way by.
On foot?
I might ride on the back of a tank, one or two of them.
That is incredible.
It's a long way, yeah.
So what was their first objective?
First objective for the Green Howards, punch through the German beach defences, get off the beach.
That is no easy task.
No, if you don't get off the beach, we're not going anywhere for the day, right? Pure and simple, yeah.
But before the men of the Green Howards and the thousands of other men in the first wave even came close to the beaches, the Navy were going to soften up the German defences.
I was leaning over the side of the landing craft, watching what was going on. The battleships firing, the rocket ships firing, explosions on the beach, thinking like bonfire night. No, only 1,000 times worse it was.
The Allies were under no illusion. The landings would be hot. They would be going up against Hitler's famed Atlantic Wall, much improved by Field Marshal Rommel in the months leading up to D-Day. It was designed to repel any invading force on the beach. And King Green sector was no different. It was being defended by the men of the 716th Static Infantry Division. It may have been comprised mainly of older German conscripts and Ostbatalionen, men from the Soviet Union now fighting for Germany, either conscripted or coerced, but they were well dug in, and behind their network of defences, it would be no easy task to defeat them. And so, in a coordinated effort, the naval warships stationed off the coast of Normandy opened fire. The ships paving the way for the Green Howards were HMS Orion and HMS Belfast. For almost an hour, they would pound the German positions. If they didn't destroy them, they wanted at least to terrify the defenders into an easy submission. Just after 7:30, the shelling stopped. The last few rocket ships fired off their rockets, and the landing craft came to the shore. It was H hour.
The officer and the sergeants were urging us to get off the beach as quick as possible. If anybody goes down, don't take no notice, just keep going. The medics will take care of them. Don't you bother, don't stop, you keep going. That's what we did.
There was one encounter on the beach I recall of a young lieutenant who was obviously feeling the strain, who said to me, "Padre, it's all right for you. You've got faith. But many of us have nothing, and it's hell."
So Eric, we've come a little way down the coast, but where have we come from and where are we now?
We've come from the beachfront of Verdun. We've literally moved 500-600 yards down the road for the landings of the 6th Battalion, Green Howards.
Right, so they literally landed right here?
Right there.
And what was that landing like?
Weather conditions were horrendous for D-Day. It wasn't the best situation. 2 to 3 foot waves breaking on the beach, big tidal surge, strong onshore winds, beaches hundreds of yards wide, flat and in the open, well exposed. The Germans were expecting a high tide landing, as previously done by Allies.
Right.
So they positioned between low tide and high tide a series of wooden and metal objects, big 2 metre wide Belgian gates from the First World War, kind of rip the bottom out of wooden landing craft or block beach exit points.
Right, I see.
Slanting logs which would capsize landing craft. Few tree trunks with tiller mines on tops. You would have found some of those Czech hedgehog, steel girders done in a big X.
Right,
yeah.
okay.
All designed to stop the invasion at the water's front. Rommel said, "Stop the invasion at the water's front or we have lost the war." He was right.
But the Allies, with an element of surprise, went against that plan and landed at low tide.
Yeah, we'd landed, about an hour and 40 minutes, 2 hours after a full moon low tide.
And why was that?
Because of the beach obstacles, we had to change the plan back in April.
So this was a way to clear the beach?
We would land with the assault units, groups of engineers, to clear a series of lanes through the beach obstacles so we could have a safe landing area for the follow-on logistics and follow-on brigades which are landing for the next few months.
Right, so the Green Howards are, what, like
tip of the iceberg?
the spearhead?
The spearhead of the invasion in this section of the landings, yeah.
And how easy did they have it on the beach? Were they able to clear these out pretty swiftly, or were there other defences?
If we look at this map that we've got here, it's a bigot map.
Okay, so this is a
from
bit more detailed.
1944. It shows you the German defences as we known on the 15th of February 1944.
So what exactly is this a map of?
This is a map that is showing exactly where the Green Howards, 69th Brigade, are going to land. They're going to land between defensive position number 33 and 35.
Okay.
Right? Backed up by the positions along the Mauvaise Ridge at the back and the Montfleury gun battery, the lighthouse complex and Marefontaine that they all need to take.
So they're landing in this sector here, but what is 33 and 35?
33, a series of pillboxes,
Okay.
88mm anti-tank guns, 50mm anti-tank guns, infantry positions round about. D Company of the 6th Green Howards will land a few hundred yards to the west of that, right? Close to this little track that's heading inland through the marshland.
I see, okay.
Where A Company will land close to WN 35.
So we've got these intelligence photos here, and maybe they can help us track the
perfect.
Green Howards journey. Where are we now?
Right, we've come along and we're now parked up just next to this junction here.
So we're right here now.
Right.
Okay.
That track there was a track taken by D and C Company, 6 Green Howards.
Right.
Now if we look further along, we've also got this little track, which is on this photograph here.
And that is literally this?
This was the track in 1944.
Right, okay.
This is Weinerstan Nest number 35.
Yep.
This is the track taken by A Company and B Company, 6 Green Howards.
Okay, do you think that's still there?
I think we should go and have a look.
I think we should go and have a look. Let's do it. You grab the bigot map.
Thank you very much.
After years of planning for the men of the Green Howards and thousands more like them, it was time. The invasion of Normandy had begun.
Eric, it is pretty bracing here. This wind is strong. Would it have been as strong as this on D-Day?
Not quite as bad.
Not quite as bad. But we're here. We've found it. This is Weinerstan's Nest 35, the objective of A Company Green Howards.
That's the one.
So what would they have faced?
Weinerstan Nest number 35 is very much an open position. Yeah. Platoon-sized position for the Germans, roughly about 40 odd men. Weapons pits, mortar pits,
Right.
anti-tank guns,
Yep.
surrounded by minefields and barbed wire. Not an easy task for anybody. And of course, what we see today is sitting on the beach.
Yeah.
In 1944, what these bunkers sat on dry land. We've had so much coastal erosion here.
Right, I see. But they're still located together. So
Yeah.
were they also positioned so they could defend each other?
Oh yeah. The Germans are not stupid by any
Yeah.
means. They're one of the best defensive armies you'll ever come across.
Yeah.
Overlapping fields of fire from one position to the next. So from where D Company landed to where
Yep.
Air Company landed, the beach would be swept crossfire.
Wow, so they faced a monumental task as they came to take this. And there's one on top of the hill up here.
Yeah.
Shall we take a closer look?
I think it's a grand idea.
All right.
Now you can see they're constructed with walls round about them. A lot of it's all collapsed today with erosion over the many years that we've been here.
Yeah.
There's a weapons pit at the side of this one,
Okay.
just on the left hand side for firing directly down onto the beach.
Yep. Right.
And this would only been maybe about 40, 50 yards inland.
Right, I see. But the ideal defensive position, if you could, well, choose one.
Yeah, you have bunkers to left and right.
Yeah. Only really a few meters apart.
Yeah. Anti-tank gun bunker, personnel bunker,
Yep.
storage bunker over there made of stone by the looks of it.
Okay.
There's another bunker just on the other side of it.
Yep.
All would be possible to defend a position from.
And were they able to move in between each one?
Trench positions.
So it's fully entrenched.
You don't stick your head above ground.
No, you don't.
Yeah,
no.
you keep your head down. Trenches would have been about this deep.
But it helps us build that picture of what A Company face as they came up for this assault. Now, that bunker there looks pretty intact.
Yeah.
Should we go over and try and analyse some of the ways in which they sought to take this?
Sure, go on.
Let's get this map out and have a look at the details of the attack.
We're here.
Oh, right, okay.
Bottom of the track, WN35. A Company had landed a couple of 100 yards to the east behind us,
Okay.
worked their way along the beach
Yep.
to assault the position. Now, you know, they came under heavy mortar, machine gun fire, the beach was being swept. Yeah. Tanks have landed as well, obviously. Yeah. They're coming in support.
Of course.
Within a few minutes of them arriving here, B Company would have landed.
Yep.
Yeah. They'd be coming round here as well.
So all is going to plan?
All is going really well to plan for the 69th Brigade.
Okay.
They've had a really superb landing on D-Day.
Because it's not often that you hear that they're all arriving at a similar time with tanks and combined arms in support.
Yeah, that was one of the very good landings for D-Day, 69th Brigade.
And does that help them take this relatively quickly?
Well, yes.
Okay.
Obviously, you know, with their combined weapons support.
Yep.
Yeah. Infantry tanks, armoured tanks. They've worked their way along. Now, the Germans had built a wall along the beachfront.
Right.
Yeah. And as A Company approached it, they're obviously under heavy fire. Once they get to the wall, there's 1 or 2 tanks around to support them. B Company are coming up quick on their rear as well.
Right.
Combined force effort. Grenades, light machine guns. German position falls quite quickly.
So this is textbook. We're talking about a textbook
Absolutely,
flank,
on the ball.
textbook combined arms, and the ability just to really force the Germans into a quick surrender. They had no choice.
And that's when the day begins. We're off the beach. We're moving inland as quickly as humanly possible. We're going to try and bypass Germans for follow-on units to mop them up. Because remember, we need to try and push 8 miles inland in one day.
Well, I think I'm going to go and follow in their footsteps and do the same.
On we go.
But whilst the men of A Company dealt with Widerstands Nest 35, the men of D Company, under the command of Major R. Lofthouse, just a few hundred metres to the east, were dealing with a rather different problem, an unknown structure right on the water's edge, ominously guarding the beach exit. As the men of D Company stormed up the beach, one man sprayed the mystery building with a hail of bullets from his Bren gun, Company Sergeant Major Stanley Hollis. In the end, it was nothing more than an old tram stop and not the pillbox the men had feared, a relic of peacetime holiday making. But this act of bravery was the first of quite an extraordinary day for Hollis. By now, fighting was raging all along the Normandy coast, from Utah to Sword Beach, and inland where airborne troops battled to control key strategic sites. Here at King Green, Gold Beach, the men of the Green Howards, having successfully opened their beach exits, were ready to push onto their next objectives.
So if I get my map out, we can start to have a look at what laid in store for D Company 6 Green Howards. Now, one thing to note, and one thing you don't learn from the history books, is just what this terrain is like. First of all, it's a lot steeper than it looks in the photos and in the books. I would say that from down there at the coast all the way up to the top of that hill is probably about 30 metres above sea level. And the first objective for D Company 6 Green Howards was the Montfleury Battery. Now today there is a housing estate in the way, but it's just over the top there, out of sight. The key thing to note here is that there was one track up to that battery and achieving that objective. You look over this landscape, it's out in the open, but it's also incredibly marshy, water-sodden, wet. You wouldn't want to send your troops through it, you wouldn't want to send your tanks through it. Not only that, it was littered with thousands of mines. Now, Allied aircraft would have gone back and forth down this coast, taking photos that could be supplied to the Green Howards so they knew what laid in store for D-Day. Photos just like these. And if you look at these, you can find exactly where we are today, right here at this crossroads. You can see Stan Hollis's hut, and exactly the same as today, you can see that same single track heading up the hillside. You've got Montfleury Battery right there with some light bombing around it. That's different today. If you look there, you can see that housing estate at the top of the hill, but so much of it is still the same. Now, there was one thing, despite this remarkable intelligence and the quality of the pictures, is that they didn't know what this was. This was known as the White House, or the Toilet Pan Villa, as the troops called it, because of its weird turning circle driveway. It could have been an officer's headquarters, it could have been a farm, or it could have been a heavily fortified position. Either way, it dominated that landscape and the route that the Green Howards had to take. And that meant one thing: they had to take that position. And if we have a look at some of the photos that were taken on D-Day itself, well, we can see that there's a lot more destruction. It was on this exact area here, potted onto this hillside, that you had HMS Belfast firing its guns over and over to destroy, well, anything and everything they could to lay the ground for the Green Howards to move up. But remarkably, on this photo here, you can see that the White House is still fully intact. And so it might be still there today. I think out of all the photos, this is the one I need to try and find the White House and to see if it's still there. This one's pretty useful because it shows the exact road we're walking on now. This is the road the Green Howards would have took. It's got that same winding pace all the way through. You've got the fields on either side, and then you've got a kind of little side turn off here, and then there's the crossroads at the top. And if I look a little bit closer, you can see that the White House is probably about 100 meters past that crossroads. So if I head up there, hopefully I can find it. So if I get my bearings a little bit, I've come down from the coast there, which is exactly along this line on the map. And then there's the crossroads. So that should put me right about here on the corner. And the White House should be around here. That wall is looking promising. It's exactly the same shape on the corner as on this photo. And there's the gap. There's the gap for that distinctive driveway. So let's head up there, see if we can find anything at all, any remains. This was an iconic site for the Green Howards. This was going to be, well, their first port of call, the first thing they had to overcome. And so it's going to be incredible to see if it's still there, any remains at all. A truly iconic enigma. No one knew what was inside. Was it that farm? Was it an officer's headquarters, or was it packed with Germans? And there it is. Still in exactly the same place. It's been remodeled a little bit, but the roof is the same. That is the White House.
Not unlike the tram stop down on the beach, the White House proved to be less of an obstacle than was feared.
But the White House wasn't just an enigma as part of the Green Howards story. It also became a key part of the D-Day mythology, because it was right here in a bunker that's now probably situated under that house that Stan Hollis started his VC story, the only VC to be awarded on D-Day. And I've got an extract from the regimental history that outlines exactly what he won that for. This is the citation. In Normandy, on June 6, 1944, during the assault on the beaches and the Montfleury battery, CSM Hollis's company commander noticed that 2 of the pillboxes had been bypassed and went with CSM Hollis to see that they were clear. When they were 20 yards from the pillbox, a machine gun opened fire from the slit, and CSM Hollis instantly rushed straight at the pillbox. recharged his magazine, threw a grenade in through the door and fired his Sten gun into it, killing 2 Germans and making the remainder prisoner. He then cleared several Germans from a neighbouring trench. By his actions, he undoubtedly saved his company from being fired upon heavily from the rear and enabled them to open the main beach exit. What a hero! They don't make him like that anymore. As I stand here in the same spot that Hollis and Lofthouse would have stood, you can start to imagine the sight that would have met them. You'd have had explosions and fires and smoke rising up and aircraft roaring overhead, and they'd have seen their comrades coming inland. But they'd made it off the beaches. Hollis had taken the pillbox here, D Company had taken the White House, but now it was time for the main objective. They had to take Widerstandsnest 35A, the Montfleury battery.
By this time, the men of A and B companies were pushing well off the beach, travelling south towards the battalion muster point. D Company, who were leading the charge at the Montfleury battery, were joined by C Company. The 7th Battalion were now also following up and were making their own way off the beach, mopping up any pockets of German resistance left behind by the spearhead units and rounding up prisoners. So far so good for the Green Howards.
So I've come 200 metres from the White House down there, and then I'm faced with this, exactly as it's marked on the photos here. I mean, look at the size of it. That gun would have been pointing directly down here. It would have been facing over towards the beaches, and of course, in the way of D Company are these tank traps. You've got minefields, you've got the marshes, that boggy fields, and then HMS Belfast has done its best to really try and neutralise this target. You can see these scars on the landscape that would have been just all around here, these mega shell holes. But the interesting thing here is this is just one of the casemates. So this would have made up Widerstandsnest 35A, and you can see along the wall that's still here, you can point it on the map. But then there's 1, 2, 3 others. So this would have been crawling with enemy. I'm going to go see if I can find the rest of them. Right, so that would have been casemate 2, and then here's casemate 3. And then located in the field over there, you've got casemate 4, if you can call it a casemate. It's been barely even started. But altogether, these would have been Widerstandsnest 35A. Now that A distinction is really important because the Germans had some pretty clear plans of how they're going to defend this coast. You had clear Widerstandsnests from 1 all the way through. For example, Widerstandsnest 34 was over in Ver-sur-Mer, which was the lighthouse. And then down here on the beach was Widerstandsnest 35, which had already been taken by the Green Howards. Now the fact that this is a late addition means that there are certain weaknesses to it. Now, if you look over at casemate 2 over here, you can see it's made out of individual breeze blocks. It's not made out of that same reinforced concrete meters thick that we're used to seeing with these particular casemates. It's the same with the one behind me. You can see daylight through this one. It's also largely unfinished because, well, they were in a rush to get these up. The one in the field over here, you can see it's basically just a brick house with these small, thin breeze blocks stacked one on top of the other. If we look inside, we might be able to find some more clues about just how weak it actually was. Oh wow, look at the state of this. And it's not like the winds of time have taken its toll on the structure. If you look at the original intelligence photos, you can see it never had a roof, just showing how much of a shoddy job was made on this one. And then look at the original breeze blocks up here. They're less than, what, half a metre thick. I'm not going to want to stand under them too long because they look like they're going to come down pretty soon. And this place would have been taking direct hits, shells coming in from the ships at sea, ships like the HMS Belfast. Look at the concrete down here. You can see piles of rubble. And it's not like this was deserted. You would have had troops in here. The Green Howards would have had to taken this by force. And I tell you what, I'm glad I wasn't stationed in here.
In the end, the battery was overwhelmed by the pounding it took from HMS Belfast, and seeing the British storming the beaches, the men of the Oss battalion and inside the bunker only put up light resistance.
Within a few hours, the Green Howards had achieved their Phase 1 objective. And although they sustained some losses, especially within their NCOs, it meant they were still fighting fit and ready for Phase 2.
With D Company 6th Green Howards now firmly in charge on top of the ridge, it would be C Company who would lead up the push inland, with A and B Companies continuing slightly to the west. Just behind them were the men of the 7th Battalion, but all the units of the Green Howards were now moving towards the same objective, the village of Crepon.
Crepon was more or less the first stop. 6th Battalion, they took Crepon. Crepon was the first place they took on D-Day.
I'm catching back up with Eric, who can tell me a bit more about the Green Howards' push inland and why Crepon was so important.
All right, Eric, so we are here in Crepon at Le Green Howards.
Best named pub in Normandy.
Best named pub, appropriately named pub as well.
Now the Green Howards were under orders to advance as quickly as possible on D-Day.
Yeah.
So from midday onwards we were advancing on the bottleneck of Crepon.
Right, so
On a 2-battalion front. On the eastern side the 7th will advance.
Okay.
And the 6th on the western side of the advance.
Right, so Crepon at this time is pretty much a bottleneck, a bit of a poor road network.
Very much so. You know, dirt roads around here in 1944, no tarmac, right?
Well,
Yeah.
as part of my D-Day detective kit, I've actually got a picture of Crepon taken by Allied air power here. So we can see that you're exactly right.
There's one road.
There's one road. So how do they get by this?
Right. If we look at the map below us, they're going to advance straight up the road from Verdun to Crepon.
Okay.
You know, they're going to take a little bit of sniper fire. They maybe get a few rounds fired at them from gun batteries guarding roads heading inland from the beaches.
Because they're in the open.
Well,
They're
that's
far
it.
more vulnerable.
You know, you never lay out beach defences. We're never covering the main roads heading inland.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's typical German defence.
Okay.
A, B and C Company will bypass the town, along with the 7th Battalion.
So they can get through as quickly as possible.
Remember, the whole thing about D-Day, will get as much land as quickly as possible on D-Day. Bypass strong resistance.
Okay.
That left D Company just to go into the town, check out any opposition, make sure that, you know, we weren't leaving thousands of Germans hidden behind us, yeah?
So what were they there to expect then? Because this is the first time they're engaging in truly urban fighting, the first time they're clearing a town.
There's been an old airstrip from the French that the Germans had occupied in Crepon.
Right.
So there'd been troops round here. So the Germans had positioned a gun battery with Czech 100mm guns at the Pavilion Farm, just here, on the road heading to Bayer.
Okay.
So D Company would come through the town, checking out buildings, speaking to the locals, investigating buildings, see if there's any Germans around. As they were working through the town and going up the road towards Bayer, Stan Hollis, leading a number of people into the Pavilion Farm, found a young boy in the house, very petrified.
Yeah.
Went round the back with a few other men, down a little alleyway at the back of the house, and looked into the field. Now he could see a dog wagging its tail across the field, so it told him people were there.
Yeah.
Right. So he ducked down, had a look round the corner, and a bullet passed off the wall. Yeah. So they retired.
Yeah.
So he went back to his commanding officer. He grabbed a couple of Bren gunners, 3 other infantrymen, and a Piat.
Right.
You know, personal infantry anti-tank weapon.
Yeah, okay.
Notoriously inaccurate.
Yeah.
So he came back up to the farm. He again will go down the lane at the side of the pavilion and crawl into a rhubarb patch with the 2 Bren gunners to give him support as he takes aim with his Piat. Now at that second, 3 men will burst into the apple orchard at the side of the pavilion farm to distract the Germans. All 3 of them were killed instantaneously, within seconds. Hollis then fired his Piat, which bounced off the ground, missing the gun that he had seen. He then witnessed the gun swing round. He felt a gush of wind over his head as a shell exploded on the wall behind him, shouting at the Bren gunners to get the hell out of there. Yeah. So he just ran.
Right.
He didn't realise what had happened until he got back to the crossroads just up there. At that point, he then suddenly heard Bren gun fire. He panicked as hell, realising he'd left his 2 Bren gunners behind, knowing that the other 3 guys had been killed already.
Yeah.
So he grabbed a Bren and ran straight up the road, round the farm building, straight into the little orchard where the 3 people had been killed by the Germans already, and hammered the Germans with his Bren gun, shouting at the top of his voice for the 2 Bren gunners to get the hell out of there.
So he went in there to relieve his men?
To save their lives.
Wow.
And of course, Hollis was a real warrior. Yeah.
Well, what happened to Hollis?
He survived.
He survived?
Now, 3 other people had been killed in that apple orchard as a distraction when Hollis fired the Piat. Now, Hollis remarkably survived that. To hold off a little gun battery like that, especially when 3 people had been killed in exactly the same spot, was an incredible piece of action for Hollis. Now, we've obviously had his previous actions in the day, where he captured 2 pillboxes at the Montfleury battery. And then this action at the Pavilion farm would lead to Hollis getting the only Victoria Cross for D-Day.
Wow.
A real warrior.
A real warrior. He'd done it at Montfleury. He'd done it again. What a truly brave man.
He certainly was.
We had another bit of a skirmish with a Spandon. We just got round of it, and they must have run out of ammunition or something because they gave themselves up.
The Green Howards might have been progressing fast, but driving through myself, it's clear that this terrain is less than ideal for an invader. Just as Eric told me, the Green Howards would have been under constant threat of snipers and artillery fire. You go from wide open fields with 0 cover, and then in no time you've got this dense bocage. It doesn't take much to conceal an MG nest or an anti-tank gun here, just lying in wait. And then they go through all these tiny villages, perfect vantage points for a sniper nest, and as we found in Crepon, hiding an artillery emplacement in the back of a garden. It must have shredded their nerves. But for now, the Green Howards were able to keep up their drive inland. The shock of the Allied landings had kept the enemy resistance to a minimum, but they knew this would change eventually. And with the successful passing of Crepon, the Green Howards had achieved their Phase 2 objective. It was now time to move on to Phase 3.
Up until this point on D-Day, the 6th and the 7th Green Howards had been pretty much leapfrogging over each other. They'd punched their way through off Gold Beach, they'd moved a couple of miles inland, and they'd taken everything that stood in their way. They'd taken the pillboxes, they'd taken the Widerstands nest, the White House, they'd moved through pretty much together. But as they came to Crepon, the crossroads, they had to start fanning out like Eric told me. They had to move and meet up with other units and form a line to push through. And so the 6th Green Howards moved west and they went to Villers-le-Sec, but the 7th Green Howards had to head to Creully. It was here you had the vital bridges over the River Searle. If you didn't take those bridges, then no one could advance any further on D-Day.
What makes Creully so important is clear when you look on a map. The bridges there were the most direct route across the River Searle for the Green Howards and their accompanying armour. Failed to take these bridges, and the Allied forces would have been forced to take a 5-kilometre detour either to Revier in the east or Escaut in the west, not ideal for an army reliant, above all else, on speed. As the men of the 7th Battalion came up to Creully, they fanned out, with C Company leading the advance onto the village, expecting the worst. But in the end, the Germans had almost totally abandoned Creully, and helpfully had failed to blow the bridges up too. The 7th were able to continue their push forwards. But before too long, the streak of luck that the men of the 7th Battalion had been having was going to take a tragic turn.
As the 7th Green Howards continued to make their advance on D-Day, they had taken those strategically important bridges at Creully. They hadn't taken too much hostile fire there. It was a relatively easy fight. So they made their way through, accompanied by the 4 7th Dragoon Guards, specifically a tank detachment. As they continued their advance from Creully, they came up to a small town of Colombe. And it's here that a pretty serious incident happened. To find a bit more detail about this, we can look at the battalion diaries from the day. They don't tell us much, but it says that naval shelling hindered the battalion advance. If we look at the regimental diaries, we have a whole section on this. Shortly after this, an unfortunate incident occurred where C Company, which was leading the battalion, supported by the tanks, had driven the enemy off the ridge when, without warning, a salvo of naval gunfire landed right amongst them. To find out the impact of that, you have to turn to the Dragoon Guards history. These were the tank men that were accompanying the 7th Green Howards. It says here that the shelling ceased as suddenly as it began, but not before the 7th Green Howards had lost 3 officers and 30 of other ranks. What puzzled everyone was the fact that the fire had come not from the enemy front, but from well in the rear. Now, to illuminate that tragic error, we can look at the logbooks of HMS Orion. It was one of the ships that was off the coast of Gold Beach on D-Day, sending in that naval support. Now, supported by Allied air power, they thought that the Green Howards were German positions. No one expected that any of the Allies could have advanced so quickly. And you can see clearly from their logbook that, well, quite triumphantly, they state, "Enemy tanks destroyed. Well done."
By now, the men of the 6th and 7th Green Howards were pushing into France on a broad front. The men of the 6th had passed through Villers-le-Sec and were now being slowed up at Saint-Gabriel as word of enemy armour being moved through Bressy filtered through. Digging in preparation for a counterattack, they would make no further progress on D-Day. It was therefore down to the men of the 7th to push on to Saint-Leger and their final objective of the day.
For the 7th Green Howards, D-Day was coming to a close, but it didn't mean their mission was over. They still had one more objective to take. And if we look at the regimental diaries, then we can start to see just exactly what that objective was. If we look through here, it says that after a short period of reorganisation, the battalion continued to advance towards Colombe, with C Company still leading. So that's C Company that had just undergone that barrage from HMS Orion. Despite that, they were still at the vanguard, the spearhead of the battalion advance. Now, the village was reported clear, and the advance guard pushed towards the final objective, the wireless station. This was housed in a farm a few hundred yards west of the Colombe-Lucelle road. Now, the trouble is, this 1940s map isn't so clear on where the Colombe-Lucelle road is. But if we look at a modern day map, then we can see exactly where I've come from. And pretty much as the crow flies, as you move through, you've got Crépon, you've got Creully, and then you've got Colombe. So if we move south, you've got Lucelle here. Now, in between the two is the D158B. That is the modern day name of that road mentioned in the regimental diaries. And if I follow that, then I might be able to find that farm where the wireless station was. That final objective of the 7th Green Howards on D-Day.
Whilst the men of the 7th Battalion Green Howards were well into their 7th mile of the day, elsewhere in Normandy, stiff German resistance had slowed Allied progress. Fierce fighting was taking place in the American sector and in the approach to Caen. Despite this, and with the sun now beginning to set, a forward squad of the 7th Battalion moved up to scout the farm.
So tell me, what exactly is this site?
Eh bien ici, donc, c'est une ferme fortifiée qui a été occupée par les Allemands de 1940 à 1944 lors de la libération. Et c'était aussi un centre de communication. C'était un point où ils pouvaient enregistrer les informations et les communiquer, notamment vers Caen.
Now, is this the transmission site, the tower?
Alors ici, c'est la zone de transmission. On a des antennes de transmission, antennes émettrices, réceptrices. On a une petite dalle en béton. On peut imaginer qu'il y avait un générateur d'installer qui permettait d'alimenter ces antennes. Et les plots ici, ce sont les pieds des antennes. Elles montent jusqu'à 30 mètres de haut.
Wow.
Donc on a une antenne émettrice, une antenne réceptrice. Et ça permettait de communiquer les données directement de la Normandie jusqu'en Allemagne.
Wow! So look at this. This would have been part of the communication structure. You would have the wiring there linked up to this giant tower, 30 meters tall, that would have been sending communications, receiving communications, allowing the Germans to coordinate their defense of the Normandy coast. That is incredible. Amazing. Let's go and explore the rest of it. And what other defences were here on the farm? Would they have artillery or anti-aircraft guns?
Oui, bah, il y avait les deux. Donc de l'artillerie, des mitrailleuses situées ici, juste sur la gauche, et encore ici sur la droite. Et on peut voir juste où est positionné le cheval, là d'ailleurs maintenant. Il y avait un système anti-aérien.
Wow, that's amazing.
Ouais.
As the battalion diary tells me, the leading elements moved up to the farm on an open plateau with no covered line of approach. As they neared the farm, the leading troops came up against a minefield and were fired on from the station itself. Not wanting to risk the loss of more life at the end of a long day, the men quietly retired back towards Cologne.
This is it, the fortified farm, the final objective of the Green Howards on D-Day. And they got within spitting distance of it. But you've got to remember, the troops were on double daylight savings time, so by the time they actually got here, it was getting dark. And so the 7th Green Howards went back and encamped just outside of Cologne, ready to return the next day. And the 6th became entrenched over there to the west. But combined, they were at the vanguard of Allied forces. They moved further inland than any British or Americans on all of D-Day.
The Green Howards made astonishing ground on D-Day, a testament to the skill and bravery of every man in both battalions. But of course, the advance came at a cost. 90 men killed and countless more injured.
We settled in for the night. We're looking round and say, where's Geordie? Where's Blondie? And one of the lads would say, well, you remember that tank that got hit on the beach? Well, them lads were next door to that tank and they got killed. And that's when it sank in that everything was serious.
Back in Crepon, just a few minutes from the farm where Stan Hollis won his VC, is a memorial dedicated to the Green Howards, a fitting tribute to the men who liberated this little corner of Normandy.
It's a fairly simple memorial, really. Just a single soldier sitting on his own, shattered after the first long day of the invasion, and for the Green Howards it had been a long war. We're talking about France and North Africa, then Italy, and now Normandy.
And the Green Howards would go on fighting. They would form part of the spearhead of the Allied advance, pushing the German forces back through northern France, Belgium, and eventually to Operation Market Garden. It was here, exhausted after almost 4 years of solid war, that they would retire back to Britain.
It's been a real privilege to follow in the footsteps of the Green Howards, to move from Gold Beach up inland, to hear the stories of people like Hollis and how they won their VC, taking pillboxes, moving through casemates, taking each town and village on the way as they rushed through inland. They're a remarkable unit, and it has been a privilege to hear their story.
I still get some flashbacks now and again, you know. Say reading paper or watching telly, reading a book. Something will click and it takes you back to then. You went into D-Day as a boy, you came out as a man.